Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast. Gavin, Schall, Alex Wolfe, and with a new year comes a new mailbag. And Alex, for this first question, perhaps the only question we're going to talk about in this podcast, we get big picture, we get existential.
Yeah, it should be a great time because it's a really great question, sort of about what defines success and what should make us happy as far as Knicks success levels. Is being just a playoff team good enough? Should the Knicks always be striving to be a championship team and anything less is considered a failure? So there's a lot to kind of chew on and something that I've been thinking about for a while. So I was very glad to get this mailbag question. And perhaps we'll end off with a little trade speculation if we have time for a second mailbag question next on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. I want to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day. We are now available on all platforms, and that includes on YouTube. If you didn't know it, now you do. Go check us out. Our smiling faces every single day on YouTube. Like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. But who's talking to you? I am Gavin Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster. He is Alex Wolfe, editor-in-chief of the Strickland, the greatest Knicks website in the whole wide world. And wow, it's the happiest time of the new year, Alex. Our first mailbag. What a day. What a time. What a question to kick it off from Ricky Rodriguez at R_Rod84. Big shout out to Ricky. Asks good questions literally every single time we have a mailbag. So he is one of the many MVPs of this show. And he wants to know, Alex, he kind of just went into your mind and heart here, because this is something that you and I discuss quite a bit, not always on air, but I know it's something that's always around your head. How am I supposed to feel? The Knicks winning games feels great, but this team is not close to contention. Is this a good place to be as a franchise? It's only one team can win it all. Anyways, Alex, this is the sort of question every NBA fan outside of the perennial contenders, shout out to you Warriors fans out there, should be asking themselves, probably are asking themselves. And as Knicks fans, I know in the past we've been kind of content or at least claimed, hey, if we just had competence, that's all we ask for. But now that competence is here, is that enough for you?
Yeah, well, so first I want to say, mailbag wise, if anybody's listening to this either on YouTube or on your favorite podcast platform, whatever, and you want to ask more questions, you could definitely still do that in the YouTube comments or something, or on our Twitter. As far as this question, yeah, this is on my brain a lot. We definitely talk about this a lot more off air than we do on the pod. And we literally just had a discussion about this, like, before we put out the solicitation for the mailbag, and then got this question. I was like, wow, that's great timing, because I kind of wanted to do a show about this anyway. I think it's an interesting question, right? Like, during the real doldrums years with the Knicks, and I may have even said this on the show at some point. I don't know if someone feels intrepid enough to go back and listen to a bunch of shows from like 2019 or whatever, when the Knicks were really bad, and like the Kevin Knox rookie year, pre RJ Barrett time. But like, I used to always say, I would love if the Knicks could just be like the mid 2000s Hawks or something, or maybe slightly more than that, maybe like like the mid 2000s Nuggets with Melo, maybe something like that. Like, play fun basketball, always make the playoffs. Maybe they only make it out of the first round a handful of times, maybe make like one Eastern Conference Finals appearance and lose, but just always give you something to watch and be excited for every night. And that's what this team is right now, right? Like, they always play hard. They have a great stable of guys with Julius Randle and Jalen Brunson, RJ Barrett, all locked up now. They have a great stable of young players that are all playing well, with Grimes and Quickly and Toppin and McBride and all them. And they seem to have some flexibility to hopefully get, by some measures, better down the road. But the question is, like, how much better? And so, like, are they going to be able to get championship good? I don't know. And if they don't, is that still okay? As long as they end up like a mid playoff seed every year. Like, if they're 4 or 5 seeds, maybe 6 seed, whatever, and they push teams to, 6-7 games in the first round perennially, and then once or twice break through, make the second round, and maybe give some team trouble there, maybe one time make the Eastern Conference Finals, is that good enough? Is that going to be memorable? And I guess that's what it all comes down to me, is like, how memorable could this Knicks team be if they just stay where they are? Or do they have to get better to become memorable? Are we living in an era where things are sort of like championship or bust? Like, if you're not first, you're last. Or, are like the 90s Knicks, for example, proof that even if your team doesn't break through and win a championship, but they play hard and bring it every night and can do some stuff on the court and make some measure of noise in the playoffs, is that good enough? Like, is that good enough to cement your legacy as a team that is worth talking about for years to come? I mean, you and I still, talk longingly about the 2012 to 13 Knicks, which was one singular year where they made the second round of the playoffs and had a 2 seed. And ultimately couldn't even make the Eastern Conference Finals. And yet we still talk about that team. Although I think that the more time goes on, now we're 10 years removed from that, the more time goes on, I think some of the luster wears off of that a bit, because it was just one season. But you talk to people that were fans of the 90s Knicks, which you and I were both unfortunately a little too young for to really be fully invested in. But those people talk about those teams like they were gods, like they were really something worth remembering. And that's what I always think about with, like, philosophically with teams, like, just how good do the Knicks need to be? And can there be a version of a Knicks team where they never win a championship but are still super memorable? And I think that's kind of a good starting point for the discussion.
Yeah, so to me, that's an important distinction, right? Because is Ricky in this question? I think he's talking about teams that are maybe a step below the 90s Knicks, and maybe even like a small step below the 12-13 Knicks, because he says, but this team is not close to contention. Is that a good place to be as a franchise? It's only one can win it all. So because like we were kind of pre-show going through, like, all right, what are some teams that we could describe, like, to steal a Bill Simmons ism, critically acclaimed over our lifetimes. I mean, to me, the defining one is the Steve Nash Suns from 2004 to 2012. I mean that team, honestly, more so than the Knicks, because the Knicks sucked for pretty much that entire stretch. Kind of made me fall in love with basketball, and just was magical, right? I mean, watching Nash just play like a mini Canadian Houdini out there. Sean Marion with his funky jumper, filling the lane, stat jamming on people like Boris Diaw, Raja Bell, filling in all the gaps. But then when I was kind of honest with myself, I was like, all right, but that sort of transcends the criteria of this question, because even though that team never reached the NBA Finals, like, to me, the bar should be like, could an expert in any of those years that the team had that run credibly have said, hey, this team has a shot at a championship? And you go back and you read stuff from that era, or you live through that era, and that Suns team, with a few more breaks, and maybe one not break when Steve Nash had his nose caved in, was good enough to win an NBA championship. So they almost supersede the question to me. And then you could go to teams like a little lower down the totem pole. Like, Alex, you always referenced the, I guess was it the 2017 Hawks, 2016 Hawks? It was sometime in that range. I mean, the Kyle Korver, Jeff Teague, Al Horford, Paul Millsap Hawks, which had 4 All-Stars and played beautiful basketball. But I think everyone kind of came to the same conclusion with them, that, like, all right, like, when they run into LeBron, like, this is gonna break apart a little bit. You could throw, I mean, one of my all-time favorites, the 12-13 Nuggets, like, such a weirdo team with Wilson Chandler, with Gallo, with Ty Lawson, with Andre Iguodala. That team played beautiful basketball. Got ran out of the playoffs in the first round by the Warriors. Alex, you could throw some out there too, but all that is to say, we can talk till we're blue in the face about those teams and say how much we love them. But I do think there is that important distinction that, like, ultimately, or generally, teams that aren't ever legitimate contenders for championships, like, don't really go down in big picture NBA history. They're beloved by their fan bases, and those seasons are always memorable, and they're significant. But is that enough?
Yeah, I think that's, when I'm thinking about some of those types of teams too, I mean, I love those Suns teams too. I think they're almost in a different category, I think, than this general discussion, because they probably should have won at least one championship, but some of those breaks that went against them were like literally championship costing breaks against, like, the Spurs and all that. So yeah, I mean, that's that's like the highest end possible, I think, of this question. And those teams are memorable because they did something that literally redefined basketball with the reliance on the 3-point shot and the 7 seconds or less offense. And, just the idea of having versatile guys on the floor that didn't necessarily have a defined position, and just, being able to play 5-out ball, or like 4-out, with Amari Stoudemire running the pick and roll, or being the roll man in a pick and roll, and then just having a ton of guys that could shoot threes. So they're almost like in a category of their own to me. I think, other teams that I would look at that would fit into this category would be like I love these teams, either the McGrady Magic or the McGrady Rockets, that were sometimes somewhat high seeds, and McGrady himself was so entertaining to watch. He's like probably my favorite player of all time, but never got out of the first round famously until he was like on his literal last leg with the Spurs and made the finals as a bench player that didn't even get playing time. The Nuggets under Melo, I think are a good example. You brought this up before we started recording, like Jason Kidd, Richard Jefferson, Vince Carter Nets, not the version with Kenya Martin that made the finals. Although that one kind of counts too, because honestly, the East was so inferior compared to the West at that time that you kind of knew that an Eastern Conference championship was as far as you were ever going to get at that particular point in time. Like if you were an East team, like there was more or less, up until the Pistons breaking through in 2004, there was like basically no chance that if you made it as the team out of the East that you were going to win the championship for like 4 or 5 years there, because the West was just so much better. But yeah, there's so many teams that fit the description. I think as far as the question that you just posed, and maybe we can take a quick break and then get back into this question. But I think that the next interesting question there is, does it matter if your team reaches league-wide memorable status like those Phoenix Suns teams, where they did something so revolutionary even without a title that they became memorable and had a 2-time MVP and everything? Or is it okay to just be beloved by your fan base and not necessarily like have something that fans can look back on and be cool with, and not necessarily have to leave a huge stamp on the entire league? I think that's another interesting philosophical way to take that. But Gavin, before we get into that, do you want to quickly, it's a very important season coming up, and I'm not talking about basketball season. Do you want to let everybody know where to get their taxes done?
Yeah, Alex, the most important season there is. Go to TurboTax and don't do your taxes. Meet with an expert who'll do them for you. TurboTax experts can relieve you from the stresses of taxes and file for you so you can do not taxes. Show your eyes things that are not taxes. Unpack a moving box of not taxes. Taste not taxes. Sing not taxes a lullaby. Hope not taxes sleeps through the night. Grab a saddle and ride not taxes into the sunset. With the TurboTax 100% expert guarantee, an expert will do your taxes from start to finish so you can relax. Feels good to be done with your taxes, doesn't it? Come to TurboTax and don't do your taxes. Visit TurboTax.com to learn more. Intuit TurboTax, full service products only. Video meetings while expert does your taxes required. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. All right, we are back on Locked On Knicks. It is an important question that you just posed, Alex. It's really, what does it matter what the rest of the NBA thinks, right? I mean, Knicks fans have never really cared about that one way or another. It's, can we live with ourselves? Can we enjoy people who watch the team every single day? And for me, I mean, there are two independent questions at play. It is aesthetic value, and it is, I think, something less definable, like a certain, like, and this derives from aesthetic value, but also kind of just the personalities on the team, the stories around the team, like the lovability of that group. And honestly, I do think these Knicks rosters, this current Knicks roster, and I guess future rosters down the road, have a chance to hit pretty high in that category. So I think based on what we're talking about, we're operating as if the Knicks are not going to make a super significant move going forward, right? They're not going to randomly get Luka Doncic in free agency in 4 years, or I don't know, miss the playoffs this year and win the lottery and end up with Victor Wembanyama, right? This is assuming the roster stays more or less the same This team can play beautiful basketball on both ends of the floor. Defensively, we've seen they have look, they have nights where they suck, but they have the capability to dominate with Mitchell Robinson, with what Quentin Grimes does, with Deuce McBride's ability to apply pressure. And I think the one bit of hope on that side of the basketball court is that RJ Barrett still has significant room to grow. And even if he's never a lead on that end, like I know you and I had moments his second year when he was kind of going at Kawhi Leonard. We were like, all right, are we looking at a special defender here? Probably not going to be that, but he could be pretty good. And I think a key cog in, I don't know, maybe like a top 6 or 7 defense over the course of a season in the NBA. And then offensively, it's worth kind of reassessing this team's ceiling, right? Because they've been the number 1 offense in basketball now for about a month. And it looks very real, the way Jalen Brunson just terrorizes defense. Julius Randle leveraging insanely high volume 3-point shooting, literally the most attempts in the league over the last, I think now 34 days, or at least that was true as of 2 days ago. And better decision making. Quentin Grimes, this was a great Fred Cat stat. He is the best blow by percentage in the NBA of any player who's attacked at least, I think it's 178 closeouts this year. Like he's ridiculously good at that. I can go on and on and on. The point is there are complementary pieces and there are pieces that make for some really fun basketball. But as a whole, I think this team tops out maybe in 2 years when you could look at like Brunson is in his prime at 28, RJ at 25, or excuse me, at 24 is approaching his prime. Grimes is 24, IQ's 24. Randall's 30, still very much within his prime. I think they could win like 52, 53 games. I think they could make the second round of the playoffs. I think it would take something kind of fluky like what happened with the Hawks for them to reach a conference finals. I don't know, Alex, would that be good enough for you with some really beautiful basketball along the way?
I think it could be. And I think that if we're going to, if we start trying to like distill this whole thing down into what would make a team a desirable one and a memorable one to Knicks fans, I think like what's like the main thing. Well, here, I'll do a quick word association. Like if you were going to give me like 3 words that you most associate with how people talk about the 90s Knicks, what would they be?
Ooh, toughness, blood, and I want to avoid using a third word that's in the exact same category, but I'll say relentlessness.
Yeah. I mean, that's sort of it. Like, I think that's what this fan base values. And that's why when the Knicks go on the floor, regardless of how likable all the players are, like, I'm kind of with you. Like, especially even like Julius Randle this year, playing the way that he is. And again, for the second time in 3 years, owning, that he didn't have a good year the year prior and trying to make better on it the next year. Like, there's something very endearing about that. There's something really endearing about how Brunson just leaves it all on the floor and goes out there and will literally go on the floor and play to the point where, like, if he could barely walk, he's like still considering it. RJ Barrett, same deal, has played through some injuries. It took him literally like apparently breaking his or dislocating his finger outside of his skin to, get him out of games, now. And he's like mad that he can't play right now. It's that sort of mentality, I think, that this fan base values. And so if the Knicks continued playing that way with this core and they never do add another player, that like mythical other star or whatever, or make that big splash trade or whatever, and these guys just continue growing with one another and continue being as likable as they are and playing hard every single night, I think that would be all it would take. And they would go down as a very memorable team, even if they only made some second rounds and, maybe threatened to make a Eastern Conference Finals one time. Or again, like you said, maybe fluked into one time and then lost like 4-1 to some powerhouse in the Eastern Conference Finals or something. I think that would be enough. Like I was just saying a minute ago, the 12-13 team was so likable personality wise that it made it that much easier to root for them and made them that much more memorable down the road, where you could point to like, man, I really think that, if they had gotten past the Pacers, they would have really given the Heat a run for their money in the Eastern Conference Finals. But the reality is we probably all know they wouldn't have beaten them. That probably would have been where they would have topped out. And that one team that made it to the second round with maybe prospects of making it to the Eastern Conference Finals, has been memorable for 10 years now. And like I said, only now I think it's the luster maybe starting to wear off a tiny bit off that team because it's 10 years now. So if this team could do that for like 5-6 years in a row, which is like over half a decade, I think they would be remembered quite well in the history books by Knicks fans. And maybe we could kind of close off our discussion on that and then maybe talk about real quick one potential splash move that the Knicks can make as soon as this year. If we want to talk about things that could potentially be polarized into the fan base, we'll talk about a player, one Zach Lavine, in our next segment that the Knicks could maybe look at in this trade deadline as he is apparently available. But I do just have to remind everybody real quick that today's episode is brought to you by Built Bar. And if you're looking for a delicious treat but don't want all the fat and calories, you gotta try a Built Bar. We just got through the holidays, and look, my goal, your goal, a lot of people's goals is to eat a little healthier this year. And you want to eat healthier but don't want to compromise taste. Well, I've got something for you. It's Built Bars. Did I not mention that already? You got to try Built. With Built, healthy is actually tasty. Seriously, they're so delicious, you won't think they're good for you. They're perfect for your New Year's resolution. What makes them so good? Well, for starters, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. That is right, real chocolate. And they come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and coconut almond. One of my personal favorites tastes just like an Almond Joy. The best part now is you don't need to wait around to get a box. If you need that Built Bar fix immediately and you've got a Walmart or a Sam's Club by you, you can get Built Bars there now. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today. Walk to the pharmacy section and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. And if you're close to Sam's Club, run in and grab a 13-bar box with the hit flavors brownie batter and churro. You can thank me later. Of course, you could also check out built.com as well for that. And today's show is brought to you as well by Madison Square Garden. What's up, Knicks Nation? As the new year gets underway, now is the time to start planning your visit to the Mecca of basketball. Madison Square Garden. Start off the new year strong with Knicks basketball. There's lots of basketball left to be played. You could be there to catch the action live and cheer on the Knicks. Knicks fans, you guys probably all know this listening to this podcast, bring the passion and the energy. As I just said, good or bad, you could go there and boo them if they're having a cruddy night. And they make it a true home court advantage as long as the Knicks play hard. There is no experience like watching a game at the world's most famous arena. I was talking to Gavin about it before we started recording here, but there's truly no bad seats after they did the renovations. Not that there was really any bad seats before, but all the seats in Madison Square Garden are so cool now. Even if you're at the top of the 200 section, you get a great view of the court. So if you're on the fence about going because you're like, oh, I don't want to get a cheap seat, don't worry. It's not like Barclays Center where you could sit up at the top and be looking at a bunch of ants playing on a court with no depth perception of what's going on. It's a much better experience and really unmatched at MSG. So you need to be here to experience top tier competition at the Mecca of basketball, Madison Square Garden. Get your tickets at Knicks.com/locked-on today. That's Knicks.com/locked-on. All right. And we're back, Gavin, to continue talking about this great debate. I've enjoyed this a lot. I love philosophical crap like this. Going on about like what is success and what's not, because I think it's kind of fascinating. Because if you really look at it, it's sort of alluded to in Ricky's question. Like, there's so few teams that actually win championships in the NBA. So I feel like a lot of fan bases really have to temper expectations and say, all right, what is going to be enough that this is going to be an enjoyable experience for me as a fan? I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on where I ended things off in the last one, which was sort of talking about. In the last segment, I should say, talking about like the qualities of a good team and what would make it memorable. And if you agree with my overall assessment there.
Yeah, I think it was good. I mean, what I kind of went to and what I thought you were going to ask actually was like, how would you describe the 12-13 team? And I was kind of racking my head. I was like, all right, like fun, like just like the like insane, like J.R. Smith of it all, right? Like Novak coming off the bench, trading shots. And on that note, threes, like they were blowing away the all-time record for makes over the first 15 or so games of the season. I think maybe set the season record for all-time makes. I know the rate that they were hitting earlier was just on a different level. Like, and then Melo, like having a genuine superstar. And to me, that's the break between these Knicks and the 12-13 Knicks and the 90s Knicks, is that there isn't a Patrick Ewing, there isn't a Carmelo Anthony, where Jalen Brunson is fantastic. Julius Randle is having an incredible season. And honestly, if he can do what he's been doing over the last, I don't know, 14 to 18 games now, like maybe you could put him in a pretty similar category to a Carmelo Anthony. But Alex, like at the end of the day, like they're both still borderline all-stars. I'm not going to say fringe all-stars. I think Julius Randle should absolutely make the team at this point. I think Jalen Brunson has a pretty good case, but that's not really Melo or Ewing, right? So that's kind of where I draw the line, only in the sense that when you have a Carmelo Anthony, when you have a Patrick Ewing, again, you can talk yourself into the idea that you can win an NBA championship. Like I'll even go a step up in terms of players, right? Like, isn't it interesting to compare Knicks fans' experience to Mavs fans right now, right? Because the two teams, as we got to see in that game, and with the Knicks missing two of their three best players, are pretty much dead even, right? But in just completely different ways. The Knicks are incredibly deep. They have a sort of big three. And then the role players around those guys are elite, right? Like Mitchell Robinson is like there are advanced stats out there that suggest he's been one of the 30 best players in the NBA this season. Quentin Grimes is about as good of a two-way guard, non-superstar category as you can have. Emmanuel Quickley, one of the better bench players in the league. Obi Toppin, when he's healthy, one of the better bench scorers in the league. You can go on and on and on with the different interesting and helpful contributors the Knicks have, versus Dallas, where it's the Luka Doncic show, and you're looking at a guy who you're like, all right, I could, when it's all said and done, maybe he's the best player of all time. Like that's feels crazy right now. Like there's such a long way to go for that, but that is the plausible ceiling for him, right? But is it in a way more torturous to have that guy and have to watch your team fail to surround him with the right guys? I would say probably, yeah, but only because the flip side of that coin is like you're kind of one signing or one trade away from winning a title. Like if they just went out in 2 years and got Jaylen Brown and kept their supporting cast largely intact, I'd say, yeah, that's a team that could go win a championship. And ultimately, like, I guess this is kind of reductive because it's sort of like the very premise of our question. Like, you can't talk yourself into that with these Knicks teams. So sure, it could be satisfying. It could be fun. But to me, like, the whole point is like, even if you don't win a title, it's to be able to convince yourself as a fan, like, wow, if everything breaks right, there's just a small chance. Like, or if we just sign this one guy, there's a small chance. And the Knicks still, like, especially if they lock this team in, Alex, that feels kind of insurmountable. That doesn't really feel within our grasp. So I think my ultimate answer might be no, with the caveat that, like, to your point, like about the Suns and those Suns teams, like there is a higher end version of this where you're like, all right, like that would be pretty amazing.
Yeah, I think when I was thinking about this, because I put a pretty good amount of thought into this question before we did the show. I think if I was going to break it down into like a very simplified like formula almost, I would say I have like 3 categories of what a good team can be. And like a good team over the course of, let's say, like a half decade or more, right? And I think those 3 categories would be memorable, which a memorable team, I think, makes the playoffs pretty much every year, barring some sort of weird injury luck or something. Maybe makes a deep playoff run or two, or semi-deep, a couple second round appearances, maybe a conference final, something like that. I think that would be considered a memorable team to me. And I think that this Knicks team will probably be that. If they keep everything the way it is, and if everybody keeps playing the way they are, which again, unfortunately, like the one variable here is Julius Randle, who we've seen flip-flop year to year, how good or bad he looks and how he's going to play basketball. So if he sticks with where he's at right now, I could definitely see that being the case where this becomes a memorable team, even if they don't make any more moves. The next level would be legendary, which I think is if that team manages to break through and win a championship, then you earn immortality with your fan base and obviously with the league at large as well. Because, basketball junkies are going to remember, like, yeah, the Knicks won a championship. Like that will go down and never be, you'll never get washed away. Like the tide will never come sweep that championship away. Like you'll always be right there. Mm-hmm. And then the last thing would be dynasty. I think that's the pinnacle, which is like teams that people talk about forever, because they're just so good. Like the 60s Celtics, the early 70s Knicks, get talked about with quite a bit of reverence. They're like borderline between legendary and dynasty because they did get 2 championships in a short period of time. The Lakers and the Celtics in the 80s, the Bulls in the 90s, the Spurs in the 2000s, and the Lakers in the early 2000s. And then obviously the Warriors now. and the Heat in the early 2010s. There's been runs of championships that those teams become dynasties, and they're the most memorable teams in league history, and not just by their fan bases, but by the league at large. I think right now this Knicks team would be trending towards memorable, and I do agree with you that I think that there is a steep curve for them to be able to get to legendary status. But Gavin, unless you had one last parting thought on that, we can maybe talk a second mailbag question that we have for this episode real quick that talks about maybe a move the Knicks could make that could start pushing them up that hill this year.
Yeah, so that question comes courtesy of our guy in Eternal Knicks Optimist at Eternal Knicks. Great handle. Wow. That's the kind of, I don't know, it feels borderline spiritual. Anyways, how serious do you believe the Knicks' pursuit of Zach Lavine is? What would you offer as a package for him? So Alex, to preface this, Zach Lavine did not look good for a lot of this year by his standards, right? Like did not really have his prior explosiveness, complete sieve defensively, to the point that the Bulls apparently held multiple team meetings where they just essentially ripped apart Zach Lavine's effort and defensive aptitude and willingness to make the extra pass. Since then, the Bulls have started playing pretty well. Starting Tuesday, December 20th, against the Heat. They have won, let me do some quick math here, 3, 5, 8. They've gone 8-3 over their last 11 games. And Zach Lavine, since that point, has scored 21 points, 22, 33, 22, 24, 43, 15, 26, 13, 41, 36. That included an 11 three-pointer performance and a 14-point win over the 76ers. So I'll start this off by saying I don't really think the Bulls are going to trade Zach Lavine if they keep playing like this. And two, I think the price would essentially be what it was for Donovan Mitchell. And I don't know about you, Alex. I think Mitchell, especially with what he's shown this year on the defensive end, but even with the information we had in Utah, I would put him in a slightly higher category of player than Zach Lavine, just because he's had proven postseason success and Lavine really hasn't, beyond the concerns about his knee.
Yeah, I for sure would not give up a package anything close to what was rumored for Donovan Mitchell for Zach Lavine. And for one thing, it's that, yeah, he's never really shown an aptitude for the defensive end, nor, again, like he's been so bad on that end at times in his career that he's had to get like told to his face, like, you're so bad at defense, please just try a little bit. And, hey, maybe now with how the Bulls are playing, that does kind of show like, okay, yeah, if you give like baseline effort on defense, then your offense becomes a huge plus when you're playing that well. That said, I don't think he's nearly as impactful as Mitchell. I do also think, unfortunately, the Gobert trade, the DeJounte Murray trade, the Donovan Mitchell trade, all have sort of set this very high market for stars at the moment of any level. Like DeJounte Murray, I don't think was really worth what he got this past offseason, nor Rudy Gobert, even though Rudy Gobert is a great player. Like 5 first-round picks or whatever is not that. I'm sorry, but I would never give that up for him. Like, and I would not give up even 3 for Zach Lavine. I don't think, because of, the volatility of the, what you might get or not get on the defensive end from him. And for that reason, I don't really see the Knicks going after him. And if they would, it would probably be like the low end of what was rumored for Mitchell, but like minus an asset or two, like minus a player, minus a pick or 2, or something like that. Maybe you give up like quote unquote 3 first-round picks, but 2 of them are the heavily protected ones or something. That can maybe be, I can maybe stomach that, but what players are you then giving up? And then you have to consider that Quentin Grimes is going to get displaced from the starting lineup, and he's been playing so good and been one of the big catalysts to the Knicks playing as well as they are. So does the scoring, outweigh what you're going to lose big time on defense by losing your best perimeter defender in the starting lineup? I don't think that they would look at that and say, and not to mention you might have to give up Grimes to get Zach Lavine too, which then means you don't even have that guy to bring off the bench anymore. Like now you're losing your top wing defender, period. I don't think I would do it. I think between the factors of how much it would cost and the fact that star trades are so inflated right now because there's so much parity in the league right now that every team thinks they have a shot. Like bidding wars, if certain guys hit the market this coming trade deadline, the bidding wars are going to be insane. Because a lot of teams are going to talk themselves into like, we are this guy away from maybe winning a championship this year if everything breaks right for us. And so I don't think I would want to get embroiled in that sort of thing if the Bulls would make Lavine fully available.
Yeah, you hear the sirens going off outside of my house. That is a sign that we just can't trade for Zach Lavine. Anyways, on that happy note, this was a super fun conversation. I hope all of you listening enjoyed it as well. We'll be back tomorrow morning in your feeds for a game recap. But until then, he's Alex. I'm Gavin. We'll talk to you soon on Locked On Knicks.